Greetings, Earth people. It's me again, IC Robots from the Toys R Us Report, and you are listening to the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast with your host, the No Swear Gamer. What is an Atari 7800? Well, it's like a 2600, but almost 3 times better. Enjoy the show.
We're going to shoot giant bugs and blast huge rocks on today's episode of the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. Welcome to episode 2 of the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. My name is Phil and I'm your host. First of all, I just want to give some thank yous to several people. First mention goes to the Retro League podcast. I picked up on the Retro League podcast maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and they really got me interested in doing kind of video game stuff as far as podcasting and videos go. If it wasn't for them, I probably would have never started my YouTube show or this show, which came after that. So very grateful for Rob and Hugh of the Retro League podcast. It's a really cool podcast. I really appreciate that. They even gave me a shout out on their latest episode, which I appreciate, and even inspired a question of the week where they asked people if they could make a game by game podcast, what they would make. So yeah, definitely an interesting show. You should check it out. Also want to give a shout out to Dude Michael from Two Dudes and a Nest right here on the Retro Junkies Network. Michael really helped me out as far as the kind of behind the scenes getting a podcast up and going. You know, I know how to record one, but as far as, getting it ready for iTunes, getting it uploaded there, all that kind of fun stuff, he really kind of took my hand and helped me through. It's kind of interesting. One day out of the blue, he messaged me through my No Swear Gamer Facebook page and said, hey, if you're ever interested in running a podcast, this is how you can get started, and gave me a step-by-step manual. And when I had problems with a little bit of it, he was more than friendly enough to help me out. So I'm definitely grateful for your help. Thank you, Michael. And as always, I also want to thank Ferg of the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast. Just a huge help and support. I appreciate it immensely. And as always, thank you to Sarah and Kurt. Hey, we got some Atari 7800 news this week, so let's go ahead and talk about that. It turns out a new 7800 prototype has been found. Over at betaphasegames.com, they have found the prototype to Toki, which is also known as Toki Going Ape Spit. It is originally an arcade game. There were ports made on the Sega Genesis, Nintendo Entertainment System, as well as the Atari Lynx, so it makes sense that Atari would also bring it to the 7800. What's kind of interesting is that it has a date of 1993 on it, and I don't know when the last 7800 game came out off the top of my head. I think around 90, maybe 91. So it's quite interesting that they were still looking at developing games. They say that the prototype is pretty much complete with some, little minor flaws here and there. It's the beta, they call it, the beta of the prototype. And they are looking into it and kind of discovering what's all in there as we speak. They found it on an Atari Test Department computer, as well as some other games that have been found previously. So very interesting. If you want to find out more about Toki for the Atari 7800, you could go to betaphasegames.com and check it out. It's definitely a find. Very interesting that, just start this podcast and already there's Atari 7800 news that's breaking, and that is rare. It's not too often you hear about something new on the 7800 front. So definitely cool there. Kind of following up from last week's episode where we talked exclusively about the system, I found out some interesting facts about the system that I didn't have beforehand. Went over to AtariMuseum.com. Under their 7800 section, they had an area called the 20th Anniversary GCC 7800 Reunion. So apparently at the 20th anniversary of the 7800, GCC, the company who created the system, basically did all the heavy lifting, if you will. A bunch of the guys from there kind of got together and had a little discussion. And there's actually it's about an hour long discussion, maybe a little bit longer, that's on the page. It's a MP3, I believe. They didn't have video, even though it said somewhere that they were going to. I couldn't find that. But it featured Steve Golston, or Golson, I'm sorry, who was one of the big wigs, I suppose, of the GCC and designing the Atari 7800, and Kurt Vandell, who is pretty much regarded as a pretty big historian when it comes to Atari stuff. He and Marty Goldberg wrote a book called Atari Inc. Business is Fun that covers the early years, of the Atari company, especially up to basically when it was sold to Jack Tramiel. They're actually working on a follow-up book as well called Business is War that's going to talk about the Jack Tramiel years. It's a really big book. It's about 800 pages long, I believe. I have not read it. Reviews have been pretty good. There's a few people who give it some criticism because it's self-published and has some flaws when it comes to spelling errors or basically things that if you had a professional editor would have been taken care of. But I mean, when you're talking two guys self-publishing an 800-page book, I guess that's kind of par for the course. And there were some people who wanted to hear more sides of the story than what they presented. But overall, lots of good reviews and several pictures, I guess, are in the book as well. I haven't had my chance to get my hands on it. 800 pages is quite a lot to take in. Maybe someday I will get to it. But anyways, so Kurt and Steve gave this address. It was kind of, I guess, like a luncheon, and they just talked about the 7800 for about an hour. And there's some things I learned that I wanted to share with you. Let's talk first about the high score cartridge that I talked about. They said that it would keep track of 65 games. I think I said that last time. 5 scores for each game, and it would actually keep track on if you used a trackball or joystick, according to what they said. And also on the same site, I saw some kind of mock-ups of what it would look like. And it wouldn't have looked like a cartridge, according to the mock-ups I looked at. It would have kind of been longer. Now, think of it like a very thin power base converter for the Sega Master System or 32X. Or think of 3 7800 cartridge glued together side by side. It has a lot of length to it. And then you would, plug that in the system and then plug the cartridge on top. So it would have made the height of the system a little bit taller. So that was kind of interesting. Also, on the 7800 box originally, the system box, the logo was in purple. Why purple? Well, the 2600 lettering on their boxes was red at the time. The 5200 was blue lettering at the time. So what happens when you combine red and blue? You get purple. What happens when you combine 2600 and 5200? You get 7800. So later on, they would decide to go against the purple when it later came out, and they went back to kind of the burgundy red, but still something interesting there. Something that goes along with one of today's games, Asteroids, when it was being developed, they said that the guys called it Meatballs in Space because originally all the asteroids were red and they kind of looked like meatballs floating around in space. They also said that, now this is their side of the story, so, it's kind of important to keep that in mind. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that sometimes you need to hear all sides, and they're talking about people who they aren't. But they said that the CEO was developing the 7800 and was also working with Nintendo to bring their system stateside simultaneously. And the thinking is they were basically going to wait for Nintendo to sign the documents, make this a legal deal, and then hold them up as they brought out the 7800 and basically kill the Nintendo before it came to America. So they're talking about some basically business espionage there, if you will, some sort of hijinks. Now, that's their side of it, but it could be true. I just don't know. I'm just reporting the facts. They also talked about one of the programs for the computer module called WordWrite, I believe, how you could use the joystick to basically do cut and paste with this word processing program, which would have been pretty groundbreaking. It's something that, nowadays we take cutting and pasting for granted, and I guess at that time it wasn't seen a lot. So that would have been interesting for it to kind of be made popular on a home console out of all places. They also talked that there was a modem that they were talking about, and they wanted to have downloadable games. And this is a 7800, and we wouldn't see modems, until kind of a little bit in the 16-bit era, but it wouldn't be until like the PlayStation era that we really began a lot of use with modems and the Sega Dreamcast, that sort of stuff. They were also talking about a Laserdisc accessory where they could do some Laserdisc games. So you could use the Laserdisc part to make the backgrounds and maybe the Atari to do the characters on the screen. Probably similar to what the Pioneer Laser Active did. If you're familiar with that, the Pioneer Laser Active would combine with different modules, like they had a TurboGrafx 16 module and a Sega Genesis module, and they would use the Laserdisc portion of it to create a background, so just a very nice looking, almost DVD quality background, full motion video, and then they'd use either the TurboGrafx 16 or the Sega Genesis model to make the game sprite characters on the screen. So interesting there. We could have had a 7800 Laserdisc player that I think would have been very sharp. They also talked about the mini Gumby sound chip that they were thinking about for the cartridges. Now, as I discussed in the first episode, they were going to put the Toki sound chip, which they used in arcade cabinets. They were going to put that sound chip in the 7800, then they decided that there wasn't room for it or whatever reason, but that developers could put them in the cartridges. But I kind of, guessed that that would have been too high of a cost for the cartridge makers to do. So kind of going along with my theory, they made a chip that was called Gumby. Get it? Gumby and Toki. And then they wanted to make it even smaller, and so they called it Mini Gumby. And what it was supposed to be a sound chip to put into cartridges that was more cost effective. I guess that never came out, but definitely interesting there. All right, finally, last, I wanted to thank everyone for a lot of positive feedback I've gotten on the first episode. Lots of kind words by lots of people. Really, really impressed, kind of blown away, humbled by that. I also got a bunch of 5-star reviews that I don't think I've deserved yet, but I'm very grateful for those on iTunes. I did get a few kind of criticisms, I guess, if you will, and I'll just say this. I am not a professional. I understand that sometimes I don't say words the proper way, I guess you would say. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the way I was brought up and how I learned to say some things, or maybe it's just a little bit of my accent wherever I grew up in the Midwest. I don't know. It's just me. And sometimes I do talk somewhat fast, and sometimes my brain goes faster than my mouth, and my mouth tries to keep up, and I end up tripping on things. That's just the way I am. I will try and do the best job I can as I do this podcast, but I think there's just some parts of me that's just me. And one of my goals in doing this podcast is just to be myself. So that's pretty much what I'm going to try and do. So I apologize if I ever talk too fast or pronounce things the wrong way, but hopefully you can hang in with me and we can have a good time with some informative talk. Anyway, that about wraps up that stuff. Let's go ahead and get to the games. First up today is Centipede, part number CX7801. Centipede, of course, is based on the popular arcade game. The arcade game landed in arcades in 1981, and it used the Toki sound chip. So there we go, another mention of the Toki. It was designed by Ed Logg and Donna Bailey. Donna is said to be the first female designer of an arcade game. She's not the first female video game designer. Most people credit Carol Shaw, who also worked at Atari, but she worked in the home division, so they rarely met, and basically they were both like the only female in that area of Atari. Carol would go on to make games like 3D Tic-Tac-Toe on the 2600. That was one of the first games that she created, I believe, and she also created the ever-popular River Raid. There was also talk that the maybe one of the reasons Donna was included was they wanted to target the game specifically towards females. They wanted to get females attracted to more video games, which kind of on the outside sounds like a very bizarre game to pick, because you got Centipede, a game that's about bugs, and that sounds more like a boy game or guy game, if you will, than a girl game. But one thing that Donna says she did is she incorporated lots of pastels into the color, and that when the game came out, there wasn't really anything that looked quite like it color-wise. And I guess, according to reports, it actually was pretty popular with female gamers, at least at that time. Centipede is a trackball shooter. Now, the trackball itself did not start with video games. It actually started as part of a radar device that was invented by Ralph Benjamin in the 40s. The trackball technology was also used on very early versions of the computer mouse that would have a little rubber ball on the bottom of it as you moved around before we switched over to optical mouses. So basically, computer mouses, basically a computer mouse was a version of the trackball, if you will, just upside down. Now, some people credit Atari's football as being the first trackball game, but there's others who say that there was a game made by Taito in Japan that was a soccer game. I couldn't find this game. I looked for it. I couldn't find one with the trackball, so I'm not sure which is correct. It's very popular that is correct. But anyway, there are 3 different sizes of standard trackballs. They can come in all shapes and sizes. Well, I guess they have to be round, but they can come in all different sizes. But typically you have 3 to choose from. First is the 2 1/4 inch variation. This is the diameter, of course. This, I believe, was used in Centipede, and basically it's the size of a billiard ball. So hypothetically speaking, if you have a cabinet that uses that, it's possible that you could just insert it. Now, if you don't know what a trackball is, it's inserted into the cabinets. Only the top portion of it is exposed, and you use your thumbs or palms to move it around. This is most popular today in the game Golden Tee Golf, which by law has to be included in every sports bar in America. I just made that last part up. But if you've never played a trackball game, they can be a lot of fun. Speaking of Golden Tee, it uses a standard 3-inch ball, which is basically what is used nowadays for more modern games, and it is roughly the size of a official juggling ball. I didn't know they had official ones, but I guess that makes sense. There's also a 4.5-inch version that was used in early games like Football and Missile Command that came out by Atari. They are really, really large, supposedly. I've never seen one. Speaking of the Centipede arcade game, this is a game that I do remember playing as a kid. Now, when I grew up, this kind of era was kind of ushering its way out, and the Rampages and Double Dragons were starting to take over, but I specifically remember seeing Centipede in a laundromat when I would go up to my grandparents' cottage. How about some scientific facts? Centipedes can have anywhere from under 20 to over 300 legs. Almost all centipedes have an odd pair number of legs, and because of that, there is no such thing as a natural centipede with 100 legs. They are all different shapes and sizes, but one of the biggest is the Amazonian giant centipede. It can grow to 12 inches or more. So just imagine a ruler that has legs and looks kind of icky. These giant centipedes can eat frogs, mice, and birds. They can even hunt bats by crawling on top of the cave walls and just getting them while they are sleeping. Another scientific fact is I hate centipedes and spiders and scorpions, so that makes Centipede a survival horror game for myself. Centipede was followed in the arcades by 1982's Millipede, and it was ported to many, many consoles and computers. Probably the most famous is the 1982 version that came on the Atari 2600. Interesting thought on that version. When the ET dig happened, which happened not too long ago, they were digging up that big old, I guess, Atari graveyard in the dump in New Mexico. When they were digging up all those games, some of the early counts came up. And now they just got a portion of these games, but one of the things that really struck me as interesting, well, two things. One, there was a large variety of games. It wasn't just ETs. And the second thing is that Centipede, on the last count I saw, there was more copies of 2600 Centipede that were dug up than ETs. So does that mean we can blame Centipede for the 2600 for the great crash of the early 80s? Now, the arcade game is included on many compilations, and in 1998, a new version was created by Hasbro, who owned the Atari name at that time, for the PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast. And in 2011, Centipede Infestation made its way to the Wii and 3DS. Centipede came out to the 7800 probably officially 1986, but it could have also came out early in 1984 with the early system launch that had a very limited release, since it was mentioned in a lot of the catalogs and promotional material that came up until then. In case you didn't know, 1984 games look very, very different than their 1986 cousins, and the cartridges themselves also had a different color sticker. Usually they were in full color, and the picture of the game was much larger. So they remind me more of the late 2600 silver cartridge releases than the later 7800 releases. I have never seen one of these in the wild. I've never seen a 1984 release in the wild. I never even seen them on eBay. I have no idea how much they would be worth if they came out, but I would definitely like to have a 1984 cartridge of one of the picture label games. Pole Position I think it looks pretty much the same. There's a few that I found pictures on the internet, not many, but my guess is Centipede probably would have been out among them. Now, Atari Age, I think, says that this came out in 1987, but again, I think it really came out in 1986. I believe I found a copyright with this. One thing that's interesting about Atari 7800 games is you can find different versions with different copyright dates on them. I found, I think for both this and Asteroids, which we'll talk about later, I found cartridges and boxes that had a copyright date of 1986, 1987, and even some for 1988. So it's like every year they made them, they updated the copyright, which for some game systems was not normal, but for them, they did that. So they continuously made these games. Let's take a look at the box. The 7800 version of Centipede, the standard one, comes in your standard 7800 box. There is a large portion of pink on the top of the box that says the original Bug Blasting Classic in just basic black text, and Centipede in a flowing yellow text. The art itself is very interesting. It's actually very reminiscent of the 2600 art. It features basically a behind the back perspective of a little elf. And he's got really pointy ears. He's got like a cape. He's doing like the Spock thing with his hands, the live long and prosper sign. And it looks like he's pointing what's supposed to be a wand, but kind of looks like a number 2 pencil at the centipede. Now you can only see the back of the elf. You can see the centipede from the front. You see his smiling face coming down on you. One of the segments of his body is missing, but there's like a little line in between segments, so it's not like it's just floating in midair. There's also a spider that's crouched on a mushroom, and you can see several mushrooms all around. The 2600 version of this game is almost the same artwork, except from the behind the back perspective of the centipede, so you actually see the elf's face, I guess. So very interesting. I guess if there were creatures as small as the elf, maybe Smurf size, that did live in mushroom houses and the centipede was one of these giant centipedes, I guess it's possible that you could have a scene such as that. It's really interesting because the centipede almost looks friendly. He's got these 2 hands. Looks like he's about to give the guy a hug. So definitely some interesting artwork there. On the back, in big bold text, it says, "This game's got bugs." Get it? Bugs and, problems. Never mind. Anyways, you got like just some standard graphics of a spider and a couple mushrooms. You have a single screenshot. It's not too large. It just shows you, a single screenshot. I think it's an actual screenshot. Early on, Atari would kind of make computer paintings of the screenshots. They wouldn't be actual screenshots, but this one looks like it might be an actual screenshot. It's a centipede screenshot. Not much to say. You got your guy shooting at a centipede, a spider, and a scorpion on the top. It says hundreds and thousands of them. Creepy ones, crawly ones, buzzing ones, swarming ones. And they're all trying to get you before you get them. Centipede attacks in 12 distinct waves. All insects get faster and faster for 1 or 2 players, 4 skill levels, for use with the Atari 7800 series systems, for use with the 7800 controllers. And that is the box there. The manual was a black and white manual. By the way, the cartridge was also your standard Atari cartridge, but like many of the early releases, it was just basically a black and white label. It wasn't color. The manual is a fold-out manual, 6 pages in total. It does have a little red in the manual, especially where it says 7800 Game Manual. The first page says this: "You're trapped in the perilous enchanted forest. Dark, dangerous mushrooms push up through squishy forest floor. I didn't know mushrooms were dangerous. Snaring you on every side, threatening thumps and evil buzzings fill the air. Something slimy flashes through the mushrooms, moving in on you suddenly. Glaring eyes and quivering antennae jump out right at you. It's the centipede, and it's attacking. You grab a stick and jab it at the evil eyes. To your surprise, sparks blast from the magic stick, turning the centipede's head into a mushroom, but instantly another head grows back. You jab and jab and give, destroying the centipede before its diminishing body can grow new heads. But worse perils lurk in the forest. Other fierce centipedes, deadly spiders, venomous fleas, poisonous scorpions. You pick up 2 more sticks. With these magic wands, you might stay alive." A very interesting story. I don't know if they really had a story for the arcade version. I think it was just, you're just shooting at bugs, but definitely a creative story there. It also tells you that about the different variations. You have 4 game variations. You have a 1-player, 2-player alternating, dual player competition, or team play. So the dual player competition, you can actually destroy each other, and the team play, you cannot. You also have 4 difficulties levels: novice, standard, advanced, and expert. The control is very standard, as you would expect. You just use your joystick to move your character around near the bottom of the screen. Your character's kind of locked in at the bottom of the screen. You can't go all throughout the screen. And you can press your button to shoot sparks from your wad. Holding down the button will cause it to rapid fire, so I'm thankful that it has automatic rapid fire. For playing the game, it says you start the game with 3 magic wands, which would be lives. You use this to spark your enemy and score points. If the enemy bites you, you become temporarily paralyzed and lose a wand. Plan your strategy and think fast to avoid the paralyzing insect bites. Centipede attacks in 12 distinct waves. In Wave 1, it has a head attached to 11 body segments. Wave 2, it has a head attached to 10 segments plus a detached head. The Centipede in Wave 3 has an attached head in 9 segments with 2 detached heads. The segments continue to transform into heads until Wave 12. The Centipede has 12 independently attacking heads. The Centipede attacks from the top of the screen and winds down towards you. When you spark any part of it with your wand, that segment becomes a powerless mushroom. The segment behind it becomes the head of a new centipede. When you hit every segment of a centipede, it disappears briefly, then reappears at the top of the screen in a new and fiercer attack wave. Dotting the forest floor are magic mushrooms. These act like shields, but you can also use them to speed the centipede in its attack. The centipede slithers along horizontally in one direction. When it gets to a mushroom or the edge of the screen, it turns down to the next row of mushrooms and slides in the opposite direction. Each time you spark a mushroom, you destroy part of it. It takes 4 hits to eliminate a mushroom entirely. If you lose a wand, all partially destroyed mushrooms are magically restored. Trying to distract you from the sparking, the centipede, the spider jumps all over the enchanted forest, eliminating every mushroom it touches. The closer the spider comes to you, the more points you score when you zap it. The flea starts bugging you after you shoot away most of the mushrooms near you. It drops straight down, creating mushrooms as it falls. You must hit the flea twice to make it disappear, but be warned, after the first shot, the flea drops twice as fast. Beginning with the third wave, the scorpion scurries across the middle of the enchanted forest, poisoning every mushroom it touches. At first, it moves slowly, but as the battle goes on, it moves faster and faster and appears more often. Poison mushrooms are a different color than the other mushrooms. When the centipede bumps into a poison mushroom, it goes crazy and plunges straight through the field of mushrooms towards you. If you lose a wand, all whole and partially destroyed poison mushrooms are transformed back into magic mushrooms. If the centipede, spider, or flea bites you, you become temporarily paralyzed and your wand is snatched away. Your points are added to your running score and the rejuvenated centipede attacks again. You must replay the wave until the centipede is totally destroyed. The enchanted forest is challenging but dangerous region. By learning what dangers might lurk behind every mushroom, you'll become a skilled and victorious wand wielder. So yeah, very interesting discussion there about the gameplay. Very in-depth. I didn't realize that you could have so much depth with this game. Also interesting is that you don't technically die, you just get paralyzed, which I didn't realize that. So hooray, you're still alive. Under strategy, it says shoot away mushrooms in a straight line upwards to create a corridor. This is something that I've done all the time without having to be told. When the centipede reaches this gap, it will fall straight down and can be easily picked off. Shoot centipede heads to create new heads from the body segments left behind. Since heads are worth 10 times more than body segments, you'll score lots of points. Since the flea doesn't appear until you destroy most of the mushrooms near you, set up a mushroom shield to prevent this lightning-fast pest from striking. I never thought of that. To do that, don't shoot away mushrooms closest to your magic wand. Each creature makes a distinct sound. Learn these sounds so you'll know without looking what is attacking and where it is. But of course, it's a single-screen game, so odds are you're going to see what it is. Under scoring, it tells you that every time you score 12,000 points, you win a bonus wand, and a musical fanfare exalts your bravery. You can have a total of 6 magic wands at one time. When you lose your last one, it ends the game. For point values, if you shoot the head of the centipede, you get 100 points. A body segment is 10 points. The spider depends on how close you are. If you're really close, you get 900. Medium range, you get 600. Distant range, you get 300. And the flea is worth 200 points. Scorpions are worth 1,000 points. The magic mushrooms are worth 5 points when they're restored, but if you eliminate them, you gain a point. Poison mushrooms, if you don't shoot them, they're worth 5 points when they're restored, or whether you shoot them, they're worth 5 points when you restore them. And if they're totally eliminated, it is 1 point. And that is the manual for Centipede. Now let's talk about the music. The music of this game is basically what you expect from Centipede. Even though the 7800 basically uses 2600 sound, I think it does sound a bit better than the 2600 version. Even though I do like this 2600 sound, I think the 26 sound has a little bit of a harsher edge to it, and this one is a little bit softer. Both versions are good. I enjoyed both of them. You got a lot of sound going on throughout the whole game. Not really any music for the most part. It's just basically a sound effects game. Graphically speaking, it's Centipede. I don't think it's that impressive. I mean, you can tell what everything is, but then again, the original arcade version wasn't that impressive as well. I mean, very simple, lots of tiny mushrooms on the screen. The colors will change from level to level, but other than that, you just have your standard black background and a game of Centipede going on. I always thought that you were like in a little ship or space pod. It kind of almost looks like a head of a centipede shooting up. The spider looks pretty good. The scorpion, I don't think I knew it was a scorpion at first until I was told, but once you know, you know. And I didn't know what the flea was until I read manuals either. I just thought it was just a random bug. But, I wouldn't say it's the most impressive game, but I think it does a job, and it does a pretty good job holding up the Centipede name. I don't think you'll confuse it with the arcade title. If you put them side by side, I think the arcade version is brighter. I think the pastels pop out a little bit more, if memory serves me correct. But yeah, graphically speaking, it's an okay game. The game is fairly common. Over at Atari Age, according to their rarity guide, it gets a 1 out of 10. 1 is being the most common, and Digital Press agrees with that. So this is a pretty common game as far as the Atari 7800 is concerned. On eBay, I was checking prices. On average, a loose copy goes for about $6. I include shipping when I figure out prices, because for me, I want to know how much money I need out of my pocket, not just the base price. So $6. So you might get to buy it now for like $5.95. Or you might have to pay $2 for it and pay $3 shipping, something along those lines. Complete copies and new copies kind of roughly range the same. And I found this to be true with most 7800 games, that it almost doesn't matter if it's new or not. People tend to pay about the same price, and that went for about $10. $10 will get you a new or a complete copy, so not too much there. I did think it might be a little bit cheaper than that, at least the loose copies, but it's still pretty cheap as that is concerned. Now, one thing Atari Age does is they find external reviews and they give it an average. So they found 4 different reviews for Centipede, and out of those 4, the average score was a 92%, with the highest score being a 97% and the lowest score being an 80%. So this is a pretty highly rated game. I did not own Centipede growing up. I think the reason why I didn't own it was, one, to be honest with you, it just didn't look that impressive from the screenshot. You had a lot of small icons, but it didn't really show any big graphics, especially compared to some of the other games on the 7800 that had, think about Pole Position 2, the pack-in. It had these great backgrounds, and this game just had a black background. So as a kid, I wasn't too impressed with it compared to some of the other games. When you're younger, the graphics seem to pull you in sometimes more than the gameplay. Also, I think I found the 2600 version for like $1 at a garage sale. So the 2600 version is solid. So since I had that and the graphics that impressed me, that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't have this game growing up. All right, so let's move on to Asteroids. Asteroids, which has a part number of 7802, was based on the classic arcade game. The classic arcade game was made by Lyle Rain and Ed Logg, so it's the second time we brought them up today for Atari, and it was released in November of 1979, which means right around now it's about 35 years old, so Asteroids is celebrating a bit of an anniversary recently, at least in 2014. It is a vector game, and if you don't know what a vector game is, typically, especially the older ones, they're on black screens, and basically they give the computer a couple dots and they tell them to draw lines in between the dots. So basically it's connect the dots graphics almost, and this leads to a lot of vector games looking very sharp with lines, a lot of pointy edges typically in vector games, and typically the lines are white and the background's black, but they could, add overlays or something to the system to kind of give it some color. I know the Vectrex did that a lot. They would add overlays that you could actually put on the screen, and it's possible that some arcade games did that as well. Asteroids in the arcade was a big hit. It sold 70,000 cabinets and earned an estimated $150 million. And I did the math, and that means the average cabinet would have cost about $2,100. And that is 1979 money, so that is a lot of coin. However, the games earned an estimated $500 million. So that means that if you bought the arcade game for $2,100, you would have ended up making about $7,100 out of it. So $5,000 profit off of the arcade game. So you can see why this would appeal to arcade owners. And actually many arcades had to make a larger coin container, a coin box for their system so that they didn't have to empty it out as much. The game does have some bugs in it, not centipedes, just computer glitches. When you get to 50 to 100 lives, if you're able to earn that many, the game slows down. And if you earn a 250th life, it basically ends your game. This was also the first Atari game to feature a high score table where you could put in your initials. It's not the first game to do this. It was inspired by Exidy's Starfire, which was the first game that allowed you to do that. And it's basically a Star Wars ripoff. And it's very similar to the Atari Star Wars game that came out later, but that one's official. One of the ways that people would earn so many lives or higher scores is that they would leave 1 or 2 asteroids on the field and then shoot the UFO as it came around, usually from the other side of the screen since your shot could wrap around. So they would just basically pick off UFOs early on the levels and just not allow the last 2 asteroids to be destroyed. It was followed by Asteroids Deluxe in 1981, which had rotating asteroids and new enemies and replaced the hyperspace with shields. So yeah, in the first game, you could use hyperspace where basically you disappear on the screen and you can appear anywhere else on the screen. And then the sequel, it gave you shields instead. This game also used the Toki sound chip. It was followed in 1982 by Space Duel and then Blasteroids in 1987, which I'd be kind of interested to see a Blasteroids arcade cabinet. That's really late on. Never saw one. I did see some video of it, and be honest, it doesn't look terribly impressive, but it does have a boss fight in your standard Asteroids gameplay, so that would have been kind of cool. It was ported to the Atari 2600 in 1981, and this version had 66 game variations. Some variations included the ability to use hyperspace. That's what most people are familiar with, but some variations actually allowed you to use shields. It's also the first 2600 game to use bank switching, which from what I understand, it's basically a way to double the memory or at least get more memory out of the game, basically by switching between 2 different programs alternating, and this can cause flickering in some games. This was also released on the Nintendo Game Boy. The Atari Lynx also had it bundled with Missile Command, and if you play the game Electro Cop on the Atari Lynx, there is a mini game that basically rips off Asteroids on one of the computer modules. In the late 90s, they also had a remake on the Game Boy Color, PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and various computers. Now, just like Centipede, Atari Age has this game coming out in 1987, but I found labels that said 1986, and I also found some basically early artwork for the box for the 1984 version that I posted over on my Facebook page. I don't know if this actually made the shelves, but it's very possible that Asteroids could be bought in 1984. It was also bundled with the systems over in Europe, so all you had to do was turn on the system with no game in it and Asteroids would be booted up. I actually think this was a better idea as a pack-in game for the 7800. I think it was smart for them on the European consoles to include Asteroids bundled in, because I think Asteroids carries a bigger name than Pole Position 2. Now, I might talk about this more later, but I think if they were really smart, what they should have done was bundled Miss Pac-Man with the Atari 7800 systems to kind of give it an edge in the marketplace, because Miss Pac-Man seems to appeal to both guys and girls, and I think it carries a lot of weight. I think it would have helped to move more systems. Racing games like Pole Position 2 can kind of just appeal to a certain segment where Miss Pac-Man had a wider audience, but I definitely think Asteroids was a better pack-in, and Europe got a little bit of the better deal as far as reaching out to more people. There is some confusion to the early names of this game that Atari was dealing with. Early on, they called it 3D Asteroids. The 1984 box, that's what they call it, is 3D Asteroids. And later on, in the back of system boxes, including the box I got, they called it Deluxe Asteroids, which may have confused a lot of people because the sequel in the arcade was called Asteroids Deluxe, and it's not the same game. When it finally came out in 1986, it came in your standard silver Atari 7800 box. Has a smaller portion that's in blue that says the Ultimate Astro Classic. Asteroids has a cool kind of a font there that they use for Asteroids. Reminds me a little bit of Battlestar Galactica. The box features a lot of purple rocks. Yeah, a ton of them. And 2 ships, kind of highlighting, I guess, the 2-player addition to this game. The ships kind of remind me of Star Wars Star Destroyers, except for a single person, especially when you see the second ship that's smaller, you can see the bottom of it. It almost looks like they ripped off the Star Destroyer. So it doesn't quite look like the ships that were on the 2600 box. You also have 3 purple UFOs coming from behind a purple asteroid shooting at the second player ship. And you have shot an asteroid and it's kind of blown up into a big white and green ball of gas with little rocks going all over the place. I think the artwork is okay on this. I think I prefer the 2600 version of the Asteroids box art to this. Probably because memory serves me right, they had like a closer picture of the ship and like you could really see the thrusters and it gave you more of a feeling. This one is a little more distant and it kind of makes your ship seem smaller, if you will. So box art is okay, but it's very purple. There is a lot of purple on this box. If you look at the back of the box, it says start blasting and it has a couple more purple asteroids with some more purple UFOs shooting at a ship. It has a small screenshot. This screenshot actually looks a little bit blurry to me. I think one way that they used to do screenshots is they would take Polaroids and then cut the picture out of the Polaroid. At least I know that's how they would make maps for like the original Nintendo Powers when you see all the screenshots lined up. So don't know why the screenshot is so blurry, but it definitely gives you the feeling that it's more an authentic game. But you looking at the screenshot, there's just one player on it. There's just a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 big asteroids and a couple small ones. Really a lot of black on the screenshot. The description says, it's your only way out of this cloud of hurtling astral bodies. Peripheral vision, lightning reflexes, and cool control. That's what it takes to save your ship and your life. It highlights 8 waves of devastating asteroids for 1 or 2 players. Competing player ships can appear on screen simultaneously. Why didn't you show it on the screenshot? For use with the Atari 7800 series system, for use with the 7800 controllers. I really think they should have did a better job using the real estate on the back. There's a lot of white left, and they should have mentioned how you can either compete with a friend, against a friend, or team with them, which is something you can do in the game. The manual, just like Centipede, is a 6-page foldout, uses black, white, and a little bit of kind of reddish pink mixed in here and there. The cover is just a black and white version of the game, which, of course, the cartridge was as well. It's just a black and white picture label. According to the manual, asteroids plunge at you. Trapped in a galactic cloud of asteroids, your struggling spaceship hurls towards its doom. You'll have to pulverize all the asteroids with your photon cannon to save your ship and your life. Well, yeah, definitely got to save your life, right? Rubble from an exploding asteroid bounces off your ship's hull. No, it doesn't. It blows you up. A glowing blur flashes across your viewing screen. So that's where the rubble came from. Man, this one's a little bit of a tongue twister. The asteroid was blasted by an alien robot saucer. Alien robot saucers are also trapped in the asteroid cloud, and they fire at random. You know that the metal in your ship's hull will register on their target finders before the asteroids do. The saucers could be worse danger than the asteroids. More rubble strikes your ship. Its hull rings like a bell. If you don't get busy, that could be your death knell. And yeah, that description is actually really bad because if anything touches your ship, it explodes. And I don't know why they kept using the word cloud because you don't feel like you're in a cloud. There's a bunch of asteroids around you, but, whatever. Under playing the game, it says this. Facing the asteroid avalanche. Asteroids crowd in on your ship in waves from all corners of the screen. When you empty the screen of asteroids, a new wave crowds in. Each wave you face is more difficult to destroy than the last. You have more than enough photon power to destroy all the asteroids, but you can only fire 4 shots into the asteroid field at a time. And I didn't know that originally. I don't think there was ever a time when I didn't have shots. I think 4 is good. When hit, small asteroids disintegrate, medium asteroids split into 2 small asteroids, and large asteroids break into 2 medium asteroids. In the novice level, medium and large asteroids get smaller when hit, so they don't split in the novice level. Watch out for the alien robot saucers. They are armed with special photon lasers that destroy anything they hit under all battle conditions. Both small and large saucers explode when hit. There are no saucers in the novice level. A reserve fleet of 3 ships stands by ready in hyperspace. So let me take a break here. You have a reserve fleet of ships. If your ship explodes in space, how in the world do you survive to get to them? And where are they being stored? Why don't you just go there and get out of the asteroid field? Anyways, I digress. Each time an asteroid hits you, destroying your ship, a reserve ship appears at a starting position. When the screen is clear of passing asteroids, your new ship begins play. This continues until all your ships are destroyed and you just, I guess, float into space just by yourself because you can't get destroyed that way and just live in existence in eternal darkness. I don't know. To escape from the asteroid cloud, pull back on your controller handle to warp into hyperspace, but watch out, you could be warped back at any time and the warp could destroy your ship. The highest score of the game is displayed on the ending screen and is updated as higher scores are tallied in later games, at least until you turn it off. It says that. The highest score remains on the screen until you turn your console off. I guess I shouldn't have got ahead of myself. Strategy. You can shoot at anything on the screen, but you will score more points with a target priority. The following tips can help you preserve your ship and score high. Fire first at the asteroids closest to your ship. Wow. Then fire at the fastest moving target approaching you. Fire at the saucers last. So let me get this straight. I should fire at the stuff that is more likely to hit me and is closest to me. Gotcha. You don't need to move your ship forward to play. You can stay in one place and fire, turning on hyperspace to protect yourself from asteroid collisions. That's how I play asteroids, where you just kind of stay in one spot and turn around. I didn't like moving asteroids, no matter what the version, because, once the momentum got out of hand, it became hard to kind of stop your ship. However, learning to move your ship can extend your playing time by 3 or 4 ships per game. In a 2-player team game, get together with another player in the center of the screen and divide the battle zone into equal sectors. Protect the other player from a rear approach. The asteroids will almost never be able to approach a player until the final waves. And now it talks about the game variations. You got the standard play for 1 player or 2 players alternating. Competition asteroids, where 2 players are on the screen at the same time and you can actually shoot each other. And then team asteroids, where 2 players appear on screen at the same time, and if you shoot the other guy, it just passes through the other person. Scoring. It says use your photon cannon to destroy the foe and gain points. Player 1's score is displayed in the upper left corner of the screen. Players 2 in the upper right corner. The number of ships you have remain is listed next to your score. You gain bonus ship for every 10,000 points. Points are scored in the following way. You get 1,000 points for a small saucer. You get 500 points if you shoot your friend. 200 points for the large saucer. Small asteroids get you 100 points, medium 50, and the large get you 20. And that's pretty much the manual. I will add this, that when I was using my ProLine controller, the thumb button or left button was firing, and then the right button was used to hyperspace, and pulling back on the joystick didn't do the hyperspace activity. However, if you used an Atari 2600 controller with just a single button, it did do it when you pulled back. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then when I plugged back in my ProLine controller, both of my buttons became fire buttons, and pulling back now was used for warping. So I thought that was very interesting. But if you use the method where the other button is for warping, I found that if you try and fire your cannon before your warp is complete, many times your ship would explode when it came out of the hyperspace. So kind of interesting there. It really makes you kind of want to use the 2600 controller instead. Now, according to Moby Games, this game was designed by Greg Munster and programmed by Doug McCrae and Ethan. It doesn't give a last name. Both these games, both Centipede and Asteroids, were probably developed by GCC, but this was the only one I could find names for. Atari was still kind of hiding their programmers, so it's sometimes very difficult to find out exactly who programmed their game at this point. There's actually an Easter egg related to the credits on Asteroids. Not many 7800 games have Easter eggs in them, but this one did. And here's what you do. And you have to use the second controller for this. It says on the main title screen, press the fire button. Then hold up while you press pause at the same time. Then you do the same thing with down and press pause. Hold left and pause, and hold right and pause. And let me tell you something. Holding right and pressing pause with the ProLine controller was quite the trick. But if you do this, you'll get a little screen that says by Ethan engraved, and kind of like this cursive glowing handwriting. So yeah, I guess that's where they get Ethan from. So an interesting Easter egg there. I also made a video of this Easter egg if you want to see it, and I will try to post it both under my No Swear Gamer name on YouTube and on my Facebook page as the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. Let's talk about the graphics. I really don't think overall the game is graphically very impressive. The ship, it doesn't really look like much. It kind of looks like a yellow giant cursor, like when you're moving your mouse around on a computer. Just kind of looks like a pointy cursor for the most part. The asteroids, when you pause the game, the asteroids don't look like much. They're just, basically the same kind of asteroid with just different shades of colors. You got like green and red and different shades. So they do have different colors, but they animate very well. I thought the way they spin, I could definitely see why they would think they look like meatballs, but the way they spin, I thought was pretty impressive, the animation. And when you shoot them, the way that they kind of respond to your shots, the physics of it seemed impressive as well. You also have some UFOs sometimes, and they just kind of look like generic UFOs, to be honest with you. But I don't think Asteroids was ever a game that was known for its graphics, so at least they kept the gameplay intact. Now let's talk about the sound. You got your basic Asteroid sound. Again, you're using generic 2600 sound for the most part, but it doesn't sound like the 2600 game. You kind of have that heartbeat going on. You have a lot of the shooting sounds. I think the sounds of the asteroids being blown up was somewhat impressive. And then the UFOs were kind of annoying. But for the most part, it's very basic. The only thing I wish they could have changed was the heartbeat sound gets cut out a lot between the other sounds. I think the 7800 only has 2 channels of sound, so you can only get 2 sounds at the same time. And that was usually the first to go. I wish that kind of heartbeat pulse in the background could have kept going without having to stop. Now, just like Centipede, I didn't have Asteroids growing up. I had the 2600 version, and just like Centipede, it's probably because it just didn't impress me, the box, the screenshot and whatnot. So, yeah, but I did enjoy the 2600 version. Now, both of these games, Centipede and Asteroids, made it into Atarian Magazine. If you don't know what Atarian Magazine was, it was basically Atari's answer to Nintendo Power during the late 80s. But only 3 issues came out. It was a bi-monthly magazine. I did own all 3 issues. I got them at a local bookstore. I would often look at the video game magazines, and typically they didn't cover Atari stuff, but this one did. So I was very excited. I think it was only like $2 an issue. So in the first issue, Centipede shows up in the top 10 list. In the magazine, they had a top 10 list for the 2600, XC, and the 7800. And it shows up at number 8. Karateka came up in number 7, just above it, and Donkey Kong Jr. came just below it. And this would be the only time in the magazine that either of the games would show up in the top 10 list. Supposedly, readers would send in their choices, and they'd rank them and give them points and so on and so forth. But how did they do it for the first magazine? I always wonder that when you came out with that first issue, yet it had rankings and stuff, and it claims that it was readers. Or how did they get letters? I don't know that either. So that top 10 list happened in the first issue, which was June of 1989. I think it was like a May-June kind of combo issue. The next issue was August of 1989, and it has a tip for Asteroids. They have a tip and trick section, and this is what it says for Asteroids, both for the 7800 and the XE. It says, for better protection from UFOs, break up all the larger asteroids into tiny ones. Only use hyperspace in real emergencies because you can easily die upon re-entry. For a longer game and more fun, don't play for a high score, but play like you're on a mission. And that came to Jeremy from California. Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to play like I'm on a mission next time and see if it makes a difference. Both games are also going to be represented in an upcoming video game themed movie called Pixel, or Pixels. I'm not sure which one it is, but it stars Adam Sandler. It's been in the works for a little bit. It's also going to have Pac-Man and Space Invaders, I believe. A lot of more retro kind of games rather than some of the more modern ones that we saw in Wreck-It Ralph. I'm kind of nervous about this movie because I like the idea of a video game kind of themed movie, but I know Adam Sandler movies for the most part have been kind of going downhill in most people's eyes, so we'll see how that one turns out when it finally comes out. If you want to get a copy of Asteroids, it should be pretty easy to find. Just like Centipede, it got a rarity 1 at both Atari Age and Digital Press. Loose copies were a little bit more than Centipede. I think they're going for about $8 a piece. I saw some complete copies for $12 go and some new copies for $15. So there again, you have like a very close range between the new and the complete copies. A little bit more coveted than Centipede, it appears. And over on Atari Age, it had 8 different scores with an average of 82%. The high score was 95%, and the low score was 50%. So quite a bit of range, but overall pretty favorable as far as that goes. So what did I think of both Centipede and Asteroids? Now that I got a chance to play them, after playing the 2600 versions for a long time, and not really picking these up, I think both of them are solid games. Now, I like to do a rating scale where the top rating is a Hall of Fame game. That would mean it's in your top 5. If you could only have 5 games on the 7800, that would be one of them. Solid comes next. That just means it's a solid game. Then there's kind of a meh game. You don't necessarily hate it, but it doesn't really do much for you. And then there's a trash game, and that one's fit for the trash can. So both of these, I would say, are solid games. I don't think they improved greatly on the gameplay of the 2600 versions, but the graphics definitely were a step up, even though the graphics kind of pale in comparison to, some of the other games on the 7800. I think both versions, 2600 and 7800s, can be quite a bit of fun. I did try playing Centipede with a trackball. I have a Sega Sports Pad, which was made for the Sega Master System, and the trackball, it's a trackball controller, and you can use it just with Atari games, and you just put it into the control setting. It also has a rapid fire feature for the buttons, which is kind of neat. And what I found is I had more fun with Centipede using the trackball by far. You couldn't go from side to side on the screen as quickly with the Sega Sports Pad. You were kind of stuck in like a little square, and then you had to pick up your hand and roll it over some more, where the joystick you just hold over and you could just zip from one side to the other. But it did give you some more kind of detail in that small square. I think I got better scores with the joystick, but they were both pretty close. But I would still rather play with the trackball for Centipede. It's been a long time. Atari made a trackball, and by the way, when they came out with the trackball, they spell it T-R-A-K. They dropped the C, which is kind of interesting because, Nintendo, when the NES first came out, they had game packs, but the game pack was spelled P-A-K without the C. So I don't know if there's anything there, but just interesting that these game companies like to drop the C. Don't know why. But yeah, I don't have an Atari trackball. I'd be really interested to find out which trackball is the best. I think Wicco made a trackball as well. I'm not sure which one is the best trackball, and it'd be cool to kind of compare them side by side, so maybe one day I'll pick one of those up. But yeah, both of them are solid games, especially if you enjoy Asteroids or Centipede, and Centipede might be the best home version on the market. So yeah, there you go. Both are solid, but enough about what I think. Let's go to listener feedback and find out what you think, as well as other feedback that you have for me today.
Now it's time for listener feedback. This is the part of the show where the listeners come to the rescue. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Now over on Facebook, I got some good feedback. First, I got a post from Tim. He shared this. He said, someone in the last show mentioned they used to get their games at Toys R Us, and it reminded me of the time I worked for them back in 1988 to 89. I handled what was called the security cage for all the games and expensive electronics, and I call that place the Cave of Wonders. I love getting paged over the store PA to go to the cage and to get the games for people. It gave me an excuse to linger and look at the game boxes for as long as I could get away with before the manager would notice I was gone too long. Sometimes it did seem like the people, when they went to get your game, it took them a while to come out. So now I know maybe they were just staring at the stuff. That's pretty cool. I think I might have done the same thing myself. Of course, being a minimum wage employee, I couldn't afford to buy Nintendo games, so the price of the 7800 system and games was very attractive. Being a previous 2600 owner, I decided to purchase an Atari since it would play the games I already had. I had a good couple of years before the system was discontinued, but once that happened, I regularly could get new games out of the clearance aisle for $2 each. That's awesome. I ended up selling that system a few years later, most likely to buy beer, a dumb decision. One I regretted until earlier this year when I purchased another 7800. I'm back in full swing buying games now and have 20 7800 and 25 2600 games. Thank you for doing the podcast, and I can't wait to hear all the stories from other listeners. And thank you, Tim, for sharing yours. It's really awesome. I think I mentioned this on Facebook, but you basically had what probably was my dream job as a teenager. I also asked people what they thought of Centipede and Asteroids and how they would rate them, whether they would call them Hall of Fame, solid, meh, or trash games, and this is the replies I got. Bobby says, I'm in England, so my Asteroids is built in, and I play it with a proper gamepad. I only have 10 games, though, so I don't have all that many to use as benchmarks, saying that it is a game that I played the most, and it's not a game I'm likely to get bored of, so I'm going to give it a solid rating. Centipede isn't a game I own yet, so that gets an NA, I'm afraid, though I reserve the right to change that at some point in the future, especially considering that I own a trackball too. Well, if you own a trackball, I want to hear what you think. By the way, I just finished listening to episodes 0 and 1, so I'll no doubt be sending feedback. Safe to say that I've enjoyed every minute and I'm looking forward to more. So thank you, Bobby. I'm looking forward to that as well. Ferg from the 2600 Game by Game podcast gave me his thoughts. He said he gave Centipede a solid and Asteroids a Hall of Fame game. And then he later came back and says, I tried my trackball controller, so I changed Centipede to a Hall of Fame as well. So, yep, you're allowed to change your opinions. Paul from the Retro Obscura podcast gave both games a solid rating. Tim also gave them both a solid rating. Matt also gave them both a solid rating. Greg, who's from the SNES podcast, said that he give them both a solid rating as well. William Culver from the ColecoVisions podcast and Arcade USA on YouTube gives Centipede a Hall of Fame rating and Asteroids a meh rating. So interesting there. That's the lowest I think Asteroids got. And Justin gave both of them a Hall of Fame rating. I also got some email submissions as well. If you ever want to email me, you can email me at Atari7000podcast@AOL.com. And the Retro League guys were, I think it was Jungle Rat Rob was talking about how it's kind of retro. I'm using AOL.com, and that is pretty much why I picked it. I thought it sounded kind of retro. So Atari7800podcast@AOL.com, whether it's for something I've already covered or for a game that is coming up. Anyway, the first one comes from Ed. I'm Ed Kelly, the owner of the fledgling enterprise Ed Ladding Controllers. I wanted to write and thank you for launching the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. It's very exciting to have podcasts exploring both of my favorite consoles and their game libraries. You probably heard my story read on Ferg's show last month, so I will not bore you by repeating the whole thing. The short summary of my adventure is that my youth-era Atari participation stopped with the 5200, after which I got sidetracked by girls, college, and PC games. My purchase of a 7800 came just last year, an easy selection for all the same reasons you cited in episode 1. The ability to play my original 2600 carts and also have access to the 7800 games I had never tried. But right away I was deeply disappointed by the Proline controllers, then deeply surprised to find out that the only other controllers available were the Europads that were so poorly reviewed in the Atari Age forums. In my mind, I assumed I could head out to eBay and find an old Wicca or some other third-party option from the late 80s. When it turned out that there were no other options, Ed Ladding Controllers was born. In our first 2 months, we have had a really great reception from the Atari 7800 community at Atari Age and the world at large. We are just about to start work on our second run of 50 Seagull 78 adapters, which allow you to have proper 2-button gameplay using any Sega Genesis controller with the 7800. And I think Ferg just talked about using it on his show, the 2600 Game by Game podcast, and he seemed really impressed by that Seagull adapter using the Sega Genesis controller, and I'm a fan of the Sega Genesis controller as well. And we have sold a total of 6 of the large arcade-style controllers, a mix of Super 78s, Super Twin 78s, and a single all-play Supreme 78. All that is a tiny All that is still tiny in terms of the kind of sales you would need to run a business, but Ed Ladin Controllers is a passion project for me rather than an effort to make a ton of money. Our main business is building vibroacoustic sound therapy systems and brainwave entertainment devices. That's a mouthful. You're smarter than me if you do that. I just want everyone who loves the 2600 and 7800 to find out how much fun those games can be when they are using really fantastic controllers. So yeah, that is really cool. And if you didn't know, there's a coupon code. You know you made it in the podcast industry when you become a coupon code, and Ferg from the 2600 podcast has. So if you want to head over to edladin.com, that's EDLADDIN.com, EDLADDIN.com. So kind of like Aladdin, but it's Ed Ladin. You go over there and you can use the coupon code FERG, that's FERG, all caps, and you will get 10% in your order, and you can check out all the custom-made stuff he has there. One of those controllers is a twin stick that he pretty much made, I think, so you could use it for Robotron using the dual stick method. It's a big, heavy controller. Go ahead and check that out. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on some of these, and as soon as I do, I'll let you guys know what I think of them. And Ed, thank you for your submission. I greatly appreciate it. Next up comes a submission from Trek MD over at the retrovideogamer.co.uk website. It's a very cool website that I recommend you try out. Anyways, this is what he has to say. Hi! Well, hi Trek, how you doing? Sorry I was not able to get this to you before your first official podcast. Here's my submission about the console. I got an Atari 7800 when I was in college. In the dorm, one guy had a ColecoVision and I was the Atari guy. I had given my 2600 to a cousin along with many of my games, but I kept certain favorite titles. When I saw the 7800 and its backward compatibility with the 2600, I knew I had to get the system. I was really impressed with the graphics, and back then, I wasn't really aware of why some games sounded better than others, nor did I care. I just loved being able to play some really nice looking games on my small TV in my dorm room. We used to compete on Friday and Saturday nights with games like Asteroids and Mario Brothers, and even the guy with the ColecoVision preferred playing the 7800 version of Donkey Kong. I did play with his ColecoVision. We swapped several nights. He had an add-on for it too, and I remember being impressed with that. In any case, I love the 7800, and I still have that very console. I even have some titles I never knew were rare, like Tank Command, until years later. I remember getting those as soon as they were released. Heck, I even pre-ordered by phone Rampage and Double Dragon when Activision was getting ready to release those titles. Today I have a complete collection of the commercial 7800 games, and I have an ever-growing collection of homebrew games. Gotta love people like Bob DeCrescenzo. I'm sorry, Bob. Is it DeCrescenzo? Anyways, gotta love people like Bob D, who keeps the console alive and fresh. So, Bob, I'm totally sorry for slaughtering your name. This is one of those things where my brain is going too fast. But, Trek, thank you very much. I totally appreciate that submission. I also got an email from Bryce who says, "Hi, Phil." And I say, "Hi, Bryce. First off, I want to say thanks for doing this podcast. You're welcome. I really enjoyed your first episode discussing the history and the hardware of the 7800, and I'm looking forward to future episodes. I think the 7800 is often overlooked due to the more popular and long-lived 2600 and the fact that it has a small and somewhat obscure library of games. It's nice to see this console getting the attention it deserves. My history with the 7800 is recent for the most part. My first exposure to the system was when I borrowed Pole Position 2 from someone at school. I think it was in 5th or 6th grade. When my friend told me he had an Atari and a copy of Pole Position 2, I was stoked. I only had the original, and so I asked if I could borrow his copy of Pole Position 2. My first clue that something was different about my friend's Atari was the fact that the cartridge said Pro System on it. I thought, that's different, but didn't think much of it at the time. Once I got the cartridge home, I quickly realized that it wouldn't work in my 2600 because of those extra blades on the sides of the main blade of the cartridge. Needless to say, I was pretty bummed. I brought the cartridge back to my friend the next day and told him it wouldn't work in my Atari. I asked him if he had the manual or picture of his Atari console so I could see what it looked like. He brought me a Polaroid of it the next day. That's awesome. Brought you a Polaroid. And from then on out, I wanted to get one. I thought the joysticks looked much cooler than 2600 and they had 2 buttons. They had to be better, right? However, I never seemed to run into a 7800 console at any of the stores I went to as a kid, and the NES was in full swing during the late 80s, so naturally I wanted one of those instead. All my cousins had an NES, my best friend had one, so it was a cool console to have. The 7800 quickly faded from my memory, and I'll just interject and say, when I had the 7800, all my friends had NESs too. I never met anyone as a kid who had a 7800, and most people gave me a weird look when I brought it up. So one of the cool things about this podcast is I can actually meet other people who actually own the system. So that's pretty cool for me. Fast forward to today, and the collecting bug bit me after seeing the movie Wreck-It Ralph with my daughter. She didn't know who a lot of these video characters were, and it was difficult for me to explain to her how I grew up playing Pac-Man, Q*bert, Asteroids, Space Invaders, Pitfall, etc., etc. So I told my wife that for my birthday I wanted to get a 2600 and some games bundled off of eBay. However, when I started researching Atari consoles, I ran into the 7800 again and remembered how I wanted one briefly when I was a kid. After further research and some YouTube videos, it seemed like a no-brainer to get a 7800 instead of the 2600, which I recommend if you're going to collect 2600 games. I could not only collect and play games that I had on my 2600 as a kid, but I could also play improved versions of some of the games on the 7800. I ended up getting a lot off of eBay for about $60 or so, including shipping, which is a great deal. I think the prices have gone up since then. It came with a 7800 console, a slew of 2600 games, and it came with 7800 copies of Galaga, Food Fight, Centipede, Pole Position 2, and Dig Dug. Not a bad start. Fast forward today, and I have about 22 7800 titles, including a copy of Frenzy from Atari Age. I ended up picking a copy of Asteroids shortly after I got the console, and I loved it from the start. The colors and the graphics are so much better than the 2600 version, and my daughter and I love the two-player co-op mode where we can both play a ship at the same time. The physics and trajectories the asteroids take are also much more random than the 2600 version and makes the game much more challenging. The textures and the shapes of the asteroids are also very appealing and add to the enjoyment of the game. I think the 7800 version of Asteroids is often overlooked and not given enough credit for adding so many new features to an already timeless classic. My rating for the game is solid. I don't think it's a must-own for the system, but it does a lot of things well, and if you're an Asteroids fan, it should be enjoyable. I totally agree. As far as Centipede goes, this one has gotten more play time than any other 7800 game I own. My father-in-law and my wife both love Centipede, so naturally, whenever I get the 7800 out at family gatherings, it's a go-to game. I'm just imagining someone getting out the 7800 at family gatherings. That's a very cool visual in my head. We all really love the two-player competitive mode. It really adds another element to the game because instead of the game just being you versus Centipede, it's you versus the other player and the Centipede and the spiders and the scorpions I add. Being able to block in the other player or shoot them in the back if they try to move up and around you adds some additional fun that wasn't found in the original ports of the games or in the arcade. The graphics and sound are almost arcade perfect too. They did a really great job of programming this game. My rating for this game is a Hall of Fame game. It's hands down the best port of Centipede to a home console into two-player mode, makes this game a must-own if you have a 7800. Thanks again for moving forward with the podcast. I only have about a third of the 7800 library, so I'm looking forward to learning more about the games that I don't have. Thanks, Bryce. Got another email from Danny V, who's here to share his Atari 7800 memories. Actually, I don't have any memories, not at least from the 80s, because Atari failed to promote the system. Timeline, 1986. I was sadly aware of the ownership change at Atari. Not long after, the Atari 2600 Junior started appearing in stores. Nichols Discount City, a competitor to Kmart, showcased a large display in the toy department. I thought the Junior looked like a cheap toy. Priced at $39.99, I was embarrassed for Atari. In addition, the games appeared to be the same old, but with newly designed boxes. At some point, I remember spotting a 7800 on the shelf. I really had no interest in checking it out, though. I figured it would be a disappointing flop, especially after the misguided 5200, and now the re-release of a 2600. If only Atari had actually promoted the 7800. All that was needed was one hot television commercial accompanied by department store demonstration units like Atari previously set up for the 2600. One look at Miss Pac-Man or Galaga, and I would have been sold. Kids I knew, mostly who received 2600s in 81 or 82, would have gone nuts for an improved Atari system. The fact the Atari 7800 could play 2600 games added to the tremendous incentive to buy. There were still a few 2600 games I enjoy on a regular basis, such as Pitfall, Mega Mania, and Super Breakout. Parents of my generation loved Atari, as it was usually their first experience with video games. My mother really enjoyed Atari 2600 Pac-Man. If she would have laid her eyes on the 7800 port of Miss Pac-Man, I can guarantee a 7800 under my Christmas tree that year. Today, whenever I fire up the 7800, I usually shake my head and mutter myself, if only, if only. If only refers to the fact if only Atari had actually promoted the system, how successful I believe it could have been. The games are fantastic, especially my favorites such as Robotron, Food Fight, and Mario Brothers. I also greatly enjoy many homebrews available on Atari Age. Anyways, good luck, or great show and good luck. On a side note, remember the excitement of 1980s Cola Wars, pitting Pepsi against Coke? I often wonder if a video game war would have broke out between a properly promoted, supported Atari 7800 and a Nintendo Entertainment System. I figure it would have been an unmatched era of video game excitement for the record books. Unfortunately, we will never know. Yeah, I can kind of see where you're getting at. I think the only way it would have really happened is if Warner would have kept it and would have, because the guys at Atari, if you remember from the last episode, were pretty much on fire, ready to get the 7800 out. You had the Olympics coming, so that would have been heavy promotion. If they could have released it, it would have made things a whole lot more interesting in 1984. Once Jack Tramiel got it, Jack is not a TV commercial guy. He's more of a print ad guy. He does things on a budget to cut costs, to maximize both profit and to get it in more people's hands, thinking that if it's low cost, it would get into more people's hands. But yeah, it would have been interesting if you could go back in time and Warner didn't sell it, but actually released it to see what would have happened, especially if it had a jump start on Nintendo. But that's something that sadly we will never know. I also got some audio submissions, first from Shento.
Asteroids was one of the first games we got on the 7800. The 2600 version of Asteroids was the first video game I ever played. See Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast episode 66. And while it still holds a special place in my nostalgic heart, the 7800 version is so much better. The graphics were astonishing then, the detail and rotation of the multicolored planetesimals, and they still look great today, honestly. I also like the little rocket plume that fires out of the spaceship when you apply your thrusters, and the spacey sound effects were fun, and the physics were much more realistic than before. I was old enough at this point to appreciate that sort of thing, around 10 or 11 years old. But the best thing about Atari 7800 Asteroids? Co-op. I know it had kind of been done before in Space Duel, but I'd never played Space Duel, not until last year, as a matter of fact, with my son. I cannot state enough how awesome cooperative video games are. I seek them out, I love them, but getting back to Asteroids, my brother and I would clear screen after screen of evil space rocks and UFOs, which I have to assume are also evil, otherwise we wouldn't be shooting at them. One of my favorite things to do was to push the joystick into the upper right corner and just hold it there while mashing the fire button. This makes the ship spin around the screen, which is either incredibly bold or incredibly stupid, depending on how long it takes you to careen into an asteroid. I called this maneuver, I called them Suzy Q's. Should have gone with something cool sounding like Death Blossom, but nope, Suzy Q's. I'm so ashamed. Why did I even mention that here? If I ever run for president, this is going to come back and bite me. We maintained a binder of high scores on Atari games, a binder which I still own. Looking at Asteroids, the high score was 44,160 points, set by my brother on October 8th, 1990, on the novice skill level. Speaking of co-op, Centipede! What a stroke of genius adding a cooperative mode to this already outstanding arcade port. This is the first version of Centipede that I played, and all others pale in comparison. My brother preferred to use the Atari 2600 trackball controller, though I don't know if it gave him any particular advantage. My daughter and I played this for the first time last month. It was in emulation on the Wii rather than the actual hardware in the other room. More convenient, I guess. But she scored just over 29,000 points on her very first attempt, which I thought was pretty good. I was right there with her, saving her from pesky spiders from time to time. Have I mentioned how much I like co-op games? Going back to the old high score sheet, my brother and I got a score of 441,672 points on January 20th, 1989. Co-op mode, of course. Now, Phil, you asked us to rate these games in one of 4 categories. So for Asteroids, I'm going to rate it Hall of Fame. And Centipede, well, that's going to have to fall into Hall of Fame. Yep, 2 Hall of Famers right off the bat. These are 2 of my top 5 games for the 7800 right here. Phil, in regards to my Atari motherboard display at my office, which I mentioned on the previous podcast, I had not considered the House of Horrors aspect, and it wasn't like that at all. See, when I was very young, my father would show me the silicon wafers his company manufactured, and I would stare in awe at the beautiful reflective plates and all the incredible detail they contained. A little later, I would play what I know now to be pirated Atari 2600 games using a handmade printed circuit board that fit into the cartridge slot. It was amazing as a 5-year-old to look at this contraption and think somehow this jumble of electronic pieces lets me play Pitfall in Atlantis and Enduro. I grew up to be a software engineer, and I understand now how the components work, but I still like to take a step back and look at the circuit board and think that this enables me to play Adventure or Space Dungeon or Ball Blazer or Tempest 2000. It's a thing of beauty, really. I wasn't Dr. Frankenstein in his lab or a torture droid in Jabba the Hutt's basements, just an engineer admiring the design.
Wow, that was thank you, Shinto. That was an awesome submission there. Did you say planetesimals? That 10 points for you for that, just for that alone. Yeah, the one thing that's kind of a bummer to me about playing 7800 games now is typically it's a solo player experience. My wife's not into games and my kids are kind of young yet, so basically it's just daddy playing the games by himself. I do have someone in my extended family who will occasionally play some retro games with me, but usually that's on the NES or the Sega Genesis. So yeah, I think if I could have played the co-op modes in either one of those games, I think I probably would have liked them a whole lot more. So yeah, definitely something that would add to the game by far. I know there's many games where if you're just playing it by yourself, it's not as much fun as if you play it with someone else. So thank you for that. Also got another audio submission from Willie from the ColecoVisions podcast and Arcade USA on YouTube. Willie, the floor is yours.
You are the player, because your vision is our vision.
Well, hello, Phil. Willie here from the ColecoVisions podcast with some of my thoughts on your two games you're covering this month, Asteroids and Centipede. Let me stop the game here. I know that clicking will make you insane. Anyway, let's talk about Asteroids a little bit. I haven't been able to find Asteroids for my Atari 7800 yet. I went looking at the swaps today. Had no luck. So I actually had to replay it using the MES game emulator and using my USB controller to play the game. And after playing an emulation on MES, I think I want to change my score from a 3 to a 2. I originally gave it a 3 per your chart that you posted on the 7800 Game by Game podcast page as a meh game. Well, now I've played it for a little bit. I kind of like it a little bit better than a meh game, so I'm going to give it a 2. It does have some really nice gameplay. It's really colorful, which is one of the things I really like about it. I really like all the colors. What really turns me off, though, is I wish I could have improved the sound a little bit better. It's okay for what it is, but it'd be nicer if it was just a little bit better. As for the asteroids, I just can't get over how they look like golf balls floating around in space that you're destroying. The game really reminds me of the arcade game Mad Planets, where you have a ship and you shoot these planets and stuff and they break apart. Kind of reminds me of that a little bit. But other than that, it's a really fun game. I really enjoy it. The next game that you're talking about, Centipede. Now, Centipede is one of those games I did pick up from O'Shea's that you've talked about on the podcast. I originally picked up maybe, I think, 3 or 4 games off of that website. Centipede was one of them. And the main reason why I picked up Centipede is because my wife is really crazy about the Centipede arcade game. And back then, the only Centipede I really had was the one on the Atari 2600. And I had one on my Atari 8-bit computer, which was okay. But I got this one for her on the 1700, mainly because I liked how the graphics looked on it. She really enjoys playing it a lot. It's one of her favorite games on the Atari 1700. I actually use my little Atari trackball, that CX22 trackball. I have to put it in joystick mode, and it works okay. I had to do a little bit of modifications to my trackball so it had a little bit better movement on it, because you could spin that ball like crazy, and your little centipede fighter guy doesn't really want to move that far at a time. But a little bit of modifications, and I was able to increase the resolution. I'm sorry, I'm burping a little bit. But other than that, that game is definitely a 1. I really like Centipede on the Atari 7800. So that's pretty much it. I think I'll get back to my clickety-clickety and play some more Atari 7800 games. Keep up the great podcast, Phil. I really like it. Catch you later. Ooh. Wait a minute. Oh.
The player.
Thanks, Willie. That was great. Micro Switch Willie, the Mad Modder. You know what? That's what this podcast needs, is more micro switches. Maybe my mouth needs some micro switches, and then I wouldn't, stumble on my words so much. You just have to put up with the clickety clicks of that. But that was really cool. And you know what? Now listening about what you had to say about the Atari trackball, maybe the Sega Sports Pad is an accurate representation, because that was the problem I had, is you couldn't go very far, but it was still fun to use. Definitely like it better than using a standard joystick controller. And last up is Ferg from the famous 2600 Game by Game podcast. And before I forget, like Shinto said, be sure to check out, I believe he said episode 66. He covered Asteroids, the 2600 version, and I highly recommend that you check that out after listening to this episode. Don't think he's done Centipede yet, so that one is yet to come. So Ferg, it's all you.
Hey Phil, Ferg here from the One Dude and a VCS podcast. Talking about Centipede and Asteroids today, the first... two of the first games that came out for the 7800. First thing I wanted to mention, you may have already mentioned it in the show. One of the things that Atari had against it when they actually did put out the 7800 in 86 is that the games were old. Both of these games came out in 80, I believe, in the arcades. So they were already 6 years old by the time they came out, and they were old already when the 7800 was originally going to come out. So a lot of those early games that did come out for the 7800, or that were supposed to come out in 84, were already pretty old arcade games. They're kind of old. I don't know if that was a part of the problem or not, but, Atari had a bad name already in 86, so it might have contributed a little bit to it. But anyway, for Asteroids, I was a big fan of Asteroids, the arcade game, when I was a kid. And of course, this is not a vector game on the 7800, but I like it a lot. It seems to have a lot of elements of the Asteroids Deluxe arcade game in it as well, with the rotating asteroids and it's a round thing, and you shoot it and it splits into the diamond things that kind of stalk you. That also came from Asteroids Deluxe, but otherwise, I think the graphics are really good on this game. The only thing I had a problem with was that some of them, they're all different colors, like in the original 2600 game. But some of them seem pretty dark, and I had a hard time seeing them, but that just might be my TV settings. One of the things that this did better than the 2600 version was how the asteroids traveled. Once you shot up the asteroids, they would go in all different directions, just like the arcade game, whereas the 2600 version was a lot more orderly, I guess. It wouldn't go in different directions unless you had the... I think when you had the difficulties on, I can't remember. But I know that the difficulties had to be on for the satellites to come out. Only one game variation here. You choose your difficulty and stuff at the beginning of the game. And it would go back to the title screen at the end of the game, which I thought was pretty cool. You could enter your score in and stuff. But yeah, I thought this played pretty smooth, and I like this game a lot. Centipede. My problem with Centipede on home consoles is the control, of course. I can forgive the fact that it's not an upright monitor or whatever that is. It's a lot more squash, the playfield is on home consoles. I had a lot of trouble playing this with the 7800 joystick and also the 2600 joystick. It just doesn't control right for me because it, of course, was a trackball game in the arcades, and I love playing this game in the arcades too. So what happened, I have a couple of different trackballs for the 2600. I have the regular 2600 one and one called the Pro Line. Now, I could not get the regular 2600 one to work on 7800 Centipede. It worked fine for the 2600 version, but once I plugged the Pro Line controller in, that worked great. It controlled really well. I mean, I don't think I've ever cleaned out my trackball controller, so I should probably do that to make it work a little bit better. But you have to have a trackball for Centipede, in my opinion. Not everybody's going to run out and get a trackball because they are kind of expensive on eBay. And I think the Pro line is the rarer one. So I just happened to luck out and pick one up years ago. I don't remember when I got it. Other than that, I like the sounds in this game too. I guess all this time on the internet, reading so many different things about the 7800, you're led to believe that the sound is exactly the same as the 2600 because it has the same sound chip in it. A lot of the sounds sounded almost exactly like the arcade version, which was really, really good for a 7800 game. It's been a while. I think I mentioned this before. It's been a long time since I played a lot of these games. And I do remember playing Asteroids when I first got the system. I had no clue what the 7800 was, and putting Asteroids in, it just blows your mind that it looks like that. And an Atari system that can look like that. But I love both of these games on the 7800. Really, really good versions of arcade games, even though Asteroids is not a vector game. But Centipede really shines, I think, especially if you have a trackball controller. So thanks, Phil. Looking forward to the next few games. I don't think I have played those very much, if at all. I think it was the winter theme games, so I'll be sure to check those out soon. And I'm also glad that you're doing a show every 2 weeks instead of 1 week. I was afraid that you were going to get burnt out doing the 2 games per week on this, and then also the No Swear Gamer show on YouTube. So I'm glad that you're doing that. Thanks, Phil. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ferg. Yeah, if you guys haven't paid attention to my Facebook post, I think I posted on some forums as well. I'm going to make this a bi-weekly show right now. Maybe at some point I go weekly, but I wanted to give both myself time because I'm a rookie at this and I didn't want to overwhelm myself, and also give the podcast time to find its audience, because I think the listener submissions really make the podcast great and not just my rambling. I think that's just the minor part of it. I think the major part is your submission. So I want to give people a chance to find it and submit stuff to it before it runs its course. So yeah, I plan on doing that. And I think, Ferg, you just initiated the Ferg effect on the ProLine trackball controllers, because I was wondering that if there was a difference between the two, and now you make me want to get a ProLine controller. Want to say something too real quickly. You mentioned the sound, and I think part of it is by this time, the programmers really knew what to do with the sound chip. They really knew how to organize it, use it. I don't know if because of the Maria chip, they could put more memory towards the sound. I don't know if that makes a difference, but yeah, I do think in general the 7800 games sound a lot better than 2600 games, especially the early ones. But if you play a game like Desert Falcon, I think it sounds almost identical on both systems. So it might just be that they know what they're doing, just like a lot of homebrewers today can crank out these games that just look amazing by 2600 standards for the 2600. So I think that's a little bit what's going on there. Yeah, and you also mentioned that the old arcade games coming out, I think that's one of the reasons why I wasn't like passionate about getting Asteroids and Centipede, is just as you said, by the time it came out, they were already old. I had played, like I said, Centipede in a laundromat, and I think I may have seen Asteroids, the arcade game, once in an old airport that had this old like arcade that was just kind of left in the dust. It had all these vector games I never saw before, and this was like in the later 80s when like Double Dragon and Rampage were out, so it was like a novelty more than anything. But yeah. Oh, and the difficulty switches. I forgot to mention this in the first episode. I don't even know if the owner's manual mentions this for the 7800, but if you're curious about the difficulty switches, because they're not labeled, what it is when the difficulty switches, which are by the joystick ports, are in the left position, that is the B setting. And when they're in the right position, it's the A setting. So if you looked at it, it looks like it's in reverse alphabetical order. But the B setting was for like beginner modes typically, and the A was for advanced. So you got beginner and advanced. So a little trick there. Actually, I got a late email from Matt. Matt, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to almost overlook it. So let's see what Matt has to say. He says, "Hi, Phil. Sorry for the last minute submission. No problem at all, Matt. I have to rate Asteroids a 1 as a Hall of Fame game." By the way, on Facebook, 1 was for Hall of Fame, 2 was for solid. So when people are giving the numbers, that's what they mean. It is both my favorite 7800 game and my favorite home version of Asteroids. The graphics and sound are improved over the earlier console versions. The Asteroids have textures, which give them more of a subtle spinning animation. The UFOs, I mean alien robot saucers, yeah, that's interesting that they called them that, have a red Cylon dot along the edge. It used the strengths of the 7800 instead of trying to reproduce vector graphics on a TV, and I do think that was a smart way of going about it. My only complaint is that you cannot choose between hyperspace and shields. That's a good point, which is an option on both the 2600 and 8-bit versions. Since I rarely use hyperspace, I play with the standard joystick instead of the ProLine controller. I would rather use down for hyperspace and save the hand cramps. I totally agree. Thanks for doing the 7800 podcast. You're welcome, Matt. So yeah, very interesting that, the 2600 version had 66 variations and the 7800 didn't even allow you to use shields. It would have been cool if what they could have done was assign the other button the shields. You could add shields and hyperspace. That would have been an interesting aspect of that, or maybe different options. But of course, with the 7800 Pro system, it seemed like they really wanted to streamline it and just give you kind of limited options. So you have the 4 different difficulties and 4 different variations: 1-player, 2-player, alternating 2-player team, and 2-player against each other. And so that's what they're going for. But yeah, I scratched my head wondering why you couldn't use the shields in it, but there you go. So there you go, guys. That sums up both Asteroids and Centipedes. It sounds like if you're a fan of those games, they're must-owns for you if you have a 7800. And if you are not super fans of them, you still will get enjoyment out of them. They would still be solid games for you. So either solid or Hall of Fame, kind of depending on your background. At least that's how it would seem to me. So thank you, guys. Got through our first episode covering games, and we got another episode coming up in the next 2 weeks. And that episode, I'm going to go out of part number order, and it's going to be the winter themed games because, there's been a lot of talk about blizzards lately and winter going on. So I thought this would be a good time to do those. So that is going to be for Hat Trick and winter games. After that, I am going to cover on the next episode Dig Dug and Food Fight. After that will be Galaga and Joust, and then we'll do some absolute games. I plan on doing Kung Fu Master and Title Match Pro Wrestling. So if you have any thoughts, memories of those games, even if you just picked them up for the first time, I want to hear about it. Go ahead and send your submission in to Atari7800podcast@AOL.com. You've got mail, and that would be just great. You can also follow me on Facebook. Again, just search for the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. I also do a show on YouTube called The No Swear Gamer that I'd love if you would check it out. I recently reached my 100th episode. I covered Sewer Shark for the Sega CD, but I've also done recent episodes that covered things like the ColecoVision flashback and the Intellivision flashback. I did unboxing videos. I also did full review videos where I showed you each of the 61 games on the Dollar General versions of those systems. So if you're interested in those, be sure to check that out. I cover a whole bunch of systems, but right now I'm favoring the Atari systems, especially the 2600 and the Nintendo Entertainment System. For the most part, got some Sega Genesis as well, and I try and mix in stuff here and there. So go ahead, check that out. Go to YouTube and search for The No Swear Gamer. You can also follow me on Twitter as The No Swear Gamer as well, or Facebook as The No Swear Gamer as well. Anyways, guys, thank you for giving me a little part of your day. I really appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And remember, guys, games are fun, but always keep first things first. I will talk to you guys later.
You have been listening to the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. But you already knew that, didn't you? The Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast is part of the Retro Junkies network. Blah blah blah, copyright 2015 blah blah blah. I really need to find a better job. I wonder if Ferg is hiring.
Planetesimals.
I am very much impressed with that.